The United States Marine Corps just positioned 15,000 combat-ready troops within striking distance of Iran's coastline. This is not a routine rotation. This is not a training exercise. This is the largest amphibious readiness group deployment to the Persian Gulf in over a decade, and it is happening right now while most of the world is focused elsewhere. By the time we are done here, you will understand why this deployment represents a fundamental shift in American military posture toward Tehran, and why Iran's leadership is scrambling to recalibrate every assumption they have made about Washington's willingness to use force. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are covering the precise military mechanics behind America's most aggressive positioning in the Middle East since the Iraq War. And mainstream coverage is not telling you what is actually happening on the ground. I am going to show you exactly what this deployment consists of, why it matters far more than the Pentagon's official statements suggest, and what it signals about the next phase of American strategy in the region. We will cover the specific capabilities these Marine units bring to the theater, the strategic choke points they can now control, and the second-order effects this has on Iran's defensive calculus and regional power projection. By the end, you will understand why this is not about deterrence anymore. This is about establishing the operational framework for something far more consequential, and the timeline for action is shorter than most analysts are willing to admit publicly. To understand why 15,000 Marines arriving in the Persian Gulf represents a genuine inflection point, you need to understand what Marine expeditionary units actually are and why they are fundamentally different from standard military deployments. The United States Marine Corps is not designed for occupation or long-term presence. It is designed for rapid force projection, amphibious assault, and establishing immediate operational superiority in contested environments. When you deploy an MEU, you are not sending peacekeepers. You are sending a self-contained combined arms force capable of executing complex military operations without requiring extensive logistical support from host nations. The current deployment consists of the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, the 13th MEU, and elements of the 31st MEU, operating from 3 Wasp-class amphibious assault ships. Each of these vessels functions essentially as a mobile military base. The USS Bataan, USS Mesa Verde, and USS Carter Hull collectively carry not just Marines, but the entire operational package required for sustained combat operations. That includes AV-8B Harrier II attack aircraft, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft capable of vertical takeoff and landing, CH-53E Super Stallion heavy lift helicopters, AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, and AAV-7A1 amphibious assault vehicles that can move directly from ship to shore and continue inland operations. This is not symbolic presence. This is deployable lethality. The geographic positioning matters enormously. These amphibious groups are currently operating in a triangle formation covering the Strait of Hormuz, the northern approaches to the Persian Gulf, and the Gulf of Oman. That positioning is not accidental. It establishes American control over the maritime choke point through which approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass every single day, representing roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. Iran has repeatedly threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz during escalatory periods. That threat has now been neutralized by sheer proximity of overwhelming force. Iran's strategic doctrine for decades has relied on asymmetric capabilities to offset American conventional superiority. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates fast attack craft, mines, anti-ship cruise missiles, and coastal defense systems designed specifically to make the Persian Gulf costly for American naval operations. The deployment of 3 MEUs with organic air and ground combat power fundamentally alters that calculus. Iranian fast attack craft become targets, not threats, when facing Viper attack helicopters and Harrier strike aircraft operating from platforms that can reposition faster than Iranian coastal defenses can reorient. The timeline of this deployment reveals deliberate escalation rather than routine presence. The 15th MEU deployed from Naval Base San Diego on January 8th, transited through the Suez Canal by February 3rd, and arrived in the Persian Gulf operational area by February 18th. The 13th MEU followed an accelerated deployment schedule, leaving 2 weeks earlier than originally planned and arriving in theater by March 2nd. The 31st MEU, normally stationed in the Western Pacific as part of the 7th Fleet, received orders in mid-February to reposition westward, arriving in the Gulf of Oman by March 15th. That is 3 separate MEUs converging on a single region within a 5-week window. The Marine Corps does not do that for routine presence operations. Now let us talk about what these units can actually do, because the capabilities matter far more than the numbers. Each MEU operates as what the Pentagon calls a Marine Air-Ground Task Force. That means integrated command structure coordinating ground combat elements, aviation combat elements, and logistics combat elements simultaneously. The 15th MEU alone consists of Battalion Landing Team 1st Battalion 5th Marines, a ground combat unit of approximately 1 to 200 Marines trained in amphibious assault, urban combat, and rapid maneuver warfare. Supporting that infantry battalion is Marine Medium Tiltrotor Squadron 164, providing tactical mobility and fire support. Add in combat logistics battalion elements, reconnaissance units, and force reconnaissance teams, and you have a completely self-sufficient strike force. The Harrier jets these ships carry deserve specific attention. The AV-8B Harrier II is a subsonic attack aircraft, but its vertical takeoff and landing capability means it operates from amphibious assault ships without requiring the massive aircraft carriers that telegraphed American intentions for decades. Each Harrier can carry a payload of 9,200 pounds, including AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles, GBU-12 Paveway-2 laser-guided bombs, and GBU-16 Paveway-2 bombs. These aircraft can launch from a ship 75 miles offshore, strike hardened targets deep inside Iranian territory, and return without ever requiring permission to use airspace from regional allies who might be reluctant to appear directly involved in military action against Tehran. Think about what that means for a moment. Every previous American military operation in the Middle East required extensive basing agreements, overflight permissions, and logistical arrangements with regional partners. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have all provided critical support for American operations, but that support comes with political costs and limitations. A government in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi can constrain American action by threatening to withdraw basing rights or deny overflight. An amphibious ready group 50 miles offshore in international waters requires permission from no one. The MV-22 Osprey changes the operational geometry even more dramatically. This tiltrotor aircraft combines the vertical takeoff capability of a helicopter with the speed and range of a turboprop aircraft. It can carry 24 fully equipped Marines at speeds up to 275 knots with a combat radius of 430 nautical miles. That means Marines can launch from ships in the Gulf of Oman, fly 400 miles inland into Iranian territory, conduct raids or direct action missions, and return to ship before Iranian air defenses can effectively coordinate a response. The Osprey fundamentally eliminated the tyranny of distance that previously protected Iranian nuclear facilities, command and control nodes, and leadership compounds from rapid strike operations. Here is where the strategic picture gets genuinely interesting. This deployment coincides almost exactly with the acceleration of Iran's uranium enrichment program. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency's March 10th report, Iran is now enriching uranium to 60% purity at a rate that could produce enough weapons-grade material for a nuclear device in approximately 8 weeks if they chose to enrich further to 90%. That timeline has shortened from 6 months just 1 year ago. The Marine deployment establishes American military forces in position to act within that decision window. The Pentagon's official statement characterized this as routine presence and deterrence. That is technically accurate but strategically incomplete. Deterrence works when an adversary believes you have both the capability and the will to act. Iran has never doubted American capability. Tehran has consistently calculated that American political will remains constrained by domestic opposition to Middle Eastern military engagements and by the logistical complexity of launching operations against a nation of 89 million people with significant defensive capabilities. This deployment directly addresses the logistical component of that equation. Let me show you exactly what changed. Prior to this deployment, any American military action against Iranian nuclear facilities would have required assembling a coalition, negotiating basing agreements, pre-positioning equipment, and telegraphing intentions weeks in advance. That gave Tehran both warning and diplomatic leverage to forestall action. The current posture eliminates that warning window. 3 MEUs operating from international waters can execute strikes with less than 24 hours' notice from decision to action. That compresses Iran's strategic decision-making timeline to the point where diplomatic maneuvering becomes far less effective. The second-order effects extend beyond the immediate military balance. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have both been engaged in normalization discussions with Iran over the past 18 months, seeking to reduce regional tensions and protect their own economic interests. Those discussions were premised on the assumption that American military commitment to the region was declining and that regional powers needed to accommodate Iranian influence. The current deployment signals exactly the opposite. Washington is not disengaging. Washington is establishing the operational foundation for decisive action if diplomacy fails. Israeli military planners are watching this deployment with particular intensity. Israel has conducted its own strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities and proxy forces, but Israeli operational range limits their ability to conduct sustained campaigns against hardened underground facilities deep in Iranian territory. The presence of American amphibious forces with Harrier strike aircraft and Osprey-borne raiding capabilities provides options that Israel alone cannot execute. According to reporting from Walla News on March 18th, Israeli intelligence officials have been in direct coordination with U.S. Central Command regarding targeting packages for potential joint operations. That level of operational coordination does not happen for deterrence posture. That happens when military action is being seriously planned. The Russians have noticed as well. Moscow's relationship with Tehran represents one of the few strategic partnerships keeping Iran connected to global power structures outside the Western orbit. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov issued a statement on March 14th, warning against military action that could destabilize the region. That warning was directed at Washington, but it reveals Moscow's limited options. Russia is deeply committed in Ukraine and cannot project significant force into the Persian Gulf to counter American positioning. The statement was diplomatic theater acknowledging Russian impotence rather than a credible threat. But here is what the deployment has not accomplished, and this matters enormously for understanding what comes next. 15,000 Marines represent formidable strike capability, but they do not represent occupation force. If the strategic objective is to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities, degrade Revolutionary Guard infrastructure, and re-establish American military dominance in the region, 3 MEUs can absolutely accomplish those missions. If the objective expands to regime change or long-term occupation, 15,000 Marines are completely insufficient. That force sizing tells you exactly what Washington is planning and what it is not planning. The deployment also has not resolved the fundamental tension in American strategy toward Iran. The Biden administration's stated policy remains diplomatic engagement aimed at reviving some form of nuclear agreement. This deployment contradicts that policy in every practical sense. You do not position your most aggressive force projection capability 50 miles from an adversary's coastline while simultaneously pursuing good faith negotiations. That contradiction creates uncertainty about American intentions that might be strategically useful in pressuring Iranian concessions, or it might simply represent internal policy incoherence within the administration. That distinction matters enormously, and it remains unresolved. Iranian defensive capabilities also should not be dismissed entirely. The Islamic Republic has spent 4 decades building layered air defense networks, hardening critical facilities against aerial attack, and dispersing nuclear infrastructure specifically to survive American strikes. The S-300 air defense systems Iran acquired from Russia provide medium to high-altitude coverage over key facilities. Iranian engineers have buried uranium enrichment centrifuges under mountains at sites like Fordow, requiring bunker-busting munitions that Harrier jets may not carry in sufficient numbers to ensure destruction. The deployment establishes American capability to strike, but it does not guarantee successful mission outcomes against all targets. The diplomatic costs also deserve consideration. Any American military action against Iran, regardless of operational success, would shatter what remains of the international consensus on non-proliferation and multilateral diplomacy. European allies who have maintained the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action framework would likely condemn military strikes as undermining diplomatic processes. That condemnation might be purely rhetorical, but it would complicate future American coalition building on other security challenges. That is a real cost even if Washington decides it is an acceptable cost. So where does this leave us? The United States has positioned 15,000 Marines with organic air and amphibious capabilities within immediate striking distance of Iranian territory. This deployment represents the largest concentration of American amphibious power in the Persian Gulf in over a decade. It eliminates the logistical barriers that previously protected Iranian facilities from rapid American action. It compresses Tehran's decision-making timeline from months to days. It signals to regional allies and adversaries alike that American military commitment to the Middle East remains robust despite 2 decades of discussion about pivoting to other theaters. What this deployment establishes is not inevitability of military action, but rather the operational framework within which such action becomes a genuine option, unconstrained by logistics or geography. The decision to use that option remains political, but the capability is now in place. The next 4 to 8 weeks will reveal whether this deployment achieves its deterrent objective or whether it represents the preparatory phase for kinetic operations. Watch for 3 indicators. First, any Iranian decision to accelerate enrichment beyond 60% purity would likely trigger American action given the compressed timeline. Second, any movement of additional American assets into theater, particularly Air Force heavy bombers or additional carrier strike groups, would signal transition from posture to action. Third, any diplomatic breakthrough in negotiations would vindicate the deployment as successful coercion rather than prelude to war. Tehran faces choices now that it has not faced before. It can halt enrichment activities and pursue genuine diplomatic resolution. It can continue current trajectory and risk military strikes that would set its nuclear program back years while potentially destabilizing the regime. Or it can accelerate toward weaponization and dare Washington to act. Each option carries profound risks, and the presence of 15,000 Marines offshore ensures that Iran makes those choices under immediate military pressure. This is not the end of the story. This is the operational framework for the next chapter. We are tracking every movement, every policy signal, and every strategic indicator that will tell us whether this deployment represents successful deterrence or the opening position for the most consequential American military operation in the Middle East since Operation Iraqi Freedom. If this analysis helped you understand what is actually happening beneath the official statements and mainstream headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are covering the second and third order effects of this deployment as they unfold, and we are watching the Iranian response in real time. The next few weeks will determine whether we just witnessed strategic deterrence or the prelude to war.